Hello, this is Digital Accessibility, the people behind the progress. I'm Joe Walensky, the creator and host of this series. And as an accessibility professional myself, I find it very interesting as to how others have found their way into this profession. So let's meet one of those people right now and hear about their journey. All right, well, here we go with another episode where I get a chance to meet another accessibility practitioner. And today I'm very pleased to be meeting with Ted Drake. Hello, Ted, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you for asking.
Well, I'm talking from my home office in Vashon Island, which is near Blink's headquarters in Seattle. Where are you talking to us from?
I'm in Palm Springs, California, just outside of Los Angeles.
All right, well, lovely. Well, yeah, I like to get there when things get a little too rain intensive here in January. But thanks for taking the time to be part of this. And maybe a first good place to start is with what you're currently involved with, what you're doing now.
Right now, I'm the global accessibility leader at Intuit. We make TurboTax, QuickBooks, accounting software, and it's been a busy year with the COVID. Basically, everybody being able to work at home. It seems like we're doing more and more and more, and so it's morphed a lot. We've been this year's been a lot of coaching and a lot of development of other people's careers, and it's been really satisfying.
Well, I imagine being in having that position in an organization as large as Intuit means that you're keep pretty busy day in, day out.
Yeah, and working from home, it's a 20-hour workday is no big deal.
All right, so we get these little benefits from it, so that's good. Well, yeah, one of the main things that I like to do with this series is to find out how people made their way into what they're doing today, what their journey was that brought them into accessibility and set them on this career path. So what would it be for you? Is there some place early on where you can remember that accessibility became something that you became familiar with and were interested in?
Yeah, I graduated college with a degree in fine art, and I was working for the Museum of Fine Art in San Diego. And I was building websites on the side. This would have been around 1999, 2000, 2001. The museum needed a new website manager. And so I stepped up and said, hey, I can do that because I've been, building sites. That's when I learned about accessibility. This was Section 508 was starting to be discussed. There wasn't really much information, but I knew that it had to be accessible. I didn't know what that meant or how it actually worked, but that was this, this goal. And fortunately, the museum world has this amazing organization. It's Museums on the Web. I think they're called something new now, and it's museum website managers and creatives and curators would come together once a year, and they would talk about how they were building their stuff. And accessibility was always just really a part of the core. And that's where I was learning about how you had to make images accessible, how you had to create descriptions of the artwork, how to create forms and such. And it was still the point where I knew how to do it, but I wasn't really getting the connection to the people.
Well, a lot of people have started in that web development area with accessibility, but most people I talked to didn't have any kind of resources or had no idea, and it was just kind of hunt and peck and meeting one person, finding one piece of info. And it sounded like you had a little bit of a launch pad there available for you.
Well, what happened was the world back then was it was a Wild West show where everybody was building whatever they could to put onto a web browser. And we're talking about Netscape Navigator and Internet Explorer 4. It was a mess. The stuff we were creating was horrendous. And it was no surprise that it wasn't accessible. And then Jeffrey Zeldman and a bunch of other people basically came forward and said, we have to stop this madness and we have to start building websites correctly. And that was the start of standards-based web development. So I got in a little bit early on that. I wouldn't say I was a pioneer, but I was certainly engaged with learning from the pioneers. And when we started over again, that's when we started making things accessible. That's when we started using semantic HTML. We separated the look, the CSS, and the JavaScript and HTML. That sounds basic today, but that was revolutionary 20 years ago. That's where I started getting into standards-based web development and accessibility just being the way you built stuff. You built it correctly. I left the museum, worked for a couple other companies to transform their sites into being standards-based web development. And from there, I got a call from Yahoo. And what was interesting about Yahoo is that they were one of the first companies to build a front-end engineering platform. Engineers that did nothing but worry about the front end. And those engineers, hardly any of them went to computer school. None of them had computer science degrees. They were all artists and writers and philosophy students and, political science students. But we were all self-taught and we all understood this. And you didn't even get in the door unless you knew what accessibility was. So it was a really great environment to be around people where you would have hour-long discussions about what is a paragraph versus an ordered list, And so I co-founded the accessibility stakeholders group at Intuit at Yahoo, which became the Yahoo Accessibility Lab. At Yahoo is where I met people that actually use assistive technology. Watching them use our products and where they were having problems, that's where it went from theory to reality. And when you see how what you build makes things easy or makes things difficult, that's when you start really getting the connection. And accessibility goes from something that you do to check a box to something that becomes a passion. And from Yahoo, I went to Intuit.
It sounds like then you started to get into a research element, kind of a shift left before things got to the code level. Is that what was going on at the lab?
Yeah, there were some really good examples. I can't remember his name. I'm sorry. I can't remember his name, but he came into the lab and we worked with Victor. And he's like, I'm working on these charts and I'd like to make the charts accessible. And so he was working with Victor, and what they came up was this concept of this new ARIA Live attribute. And so when you move through the chart, the ARIA Live would start being updated. And that's how you would find out about, the value of different elements of the chart. Well, that concept of a hidden span that had ARIA Live attributes, that's an example of what happened in the Yahoo Accessibility Lab that just became standard. The visibility hidden, where we would take the clip pattern and use the clip pattern to hide stuff visually, but it was still available to screen readers. That's another example of something that would come out of the lab. And it's because you had designers and engineers, and you had someone that used a screen reader and someone that used zoom magnification, and you put them in a room with no limitations, and some amazing things come out of it. And that's an example of that.
Yeah, and so then did your work at Yahoo? Was that then kind of a logical move to what you're doing now at Intuit, or were you reframing or kind of looking at it as a different kind of opportunity?
I don't know how this happened, but most of my career has been with financial software, insurance, and Yahoo. I worked on Yahoo Finance. And so moving to Intuit was natural because I was just used to working on financial software. But the other thing that really worked with Intuit is it's customer based. We really do care about the customer, and customers are part of everything we do. So it was just sort of a moving even more and more to the fact that it's not accessibility as a checklist or something that you read in a book, but accessibility is something where you're meeting with customers. You're watching them balance their checkbooks. You're watching them start businesses, bring on new customers. So it's about how can I use my influence and accessibility to actually, my goal at Intuit is to reduce the unemployment rate for people with disabilities. It's not to sell more copies of QuickBooks. But what I'm hoping is that enough people can use QuickBooks that they can start a new business, hire more people. And that's my goal, is to actually make an improvement in the community.
Yeah, well, with so many work opportunities, being in doing digital work, not having the tools essentially shuts you out from that whole area. So it definitely makes a lot of sense. And obviously with the types of products that your organization makes, that's right front line with that kind of thing.
Yeah. The other thing I realized at Yahoo and when I moved to Intuit is that the accessibility team is a hub. The accessibility team is the one that looks at everybody's product. And we look at everybody's code. And we look at everybody's experience across the team. So I think at Intuit, when working in the accessibility team, our original core group, we were probably the only people at Intuit that had tried every product. And when you do that, you start realizing where the duplications are, where there's 15 different versions of a carousel being used within the same product. So one of the things we did as the central team at Intuit is we started saying, let's not just focus on accessibility, but let's create the platform that all the front-end engineers can come together and start talking. Let's encourage all the mobile developers to start talking. So part of that was building a front-end engineering summit, which was basically to get it was for, by, and about front-end engineers. And that really helped break down those barriers, because we had people that would be sitting 3 desks away and had no idea what each other was working on when I first got there. And that is now no longer the problem. And I think more people need to see their accessibility team as an asset for more than just accessibility.
Well, the scenario that you just described and the hub approach that you mentioned, I think of those as being relatively mature representations of accessibility support within an organization, but it takes a lot of work just to get there. So were there certain challenges that you had to overcome, or certain ways that you approached it at Yahoo Finance and at Intuit that got it to where it ended up being?
Yeah, it was actually completely different. At Yahoo, engineers were the priority. So at Yahoo, we never bothered going to project managers and designers. We would just go straight to the engineers. That was just the way that it was, because they were the ones that were making the decisions. And then those decisions would then go back to designers and product managers. At Intuit, it's completely different. At Intuit, it's like a communal decision. So I wouldn't just go to the engineers. I would go to the project managers, figure out who was leading their team, create a presentation, go to the presentation, meet with 20 people, explain how their product worked, what needed to be done. It was about building consensus and explaining how to improve the customer experience. So it was a slightly different. Each company is going to be different. If I was working at a company where business return on investment was the number one priority, then I would do it differently. But at Intuit, the number one priority is customer experience. So I would always focus on, here's a video of how this works. Here's a video of a customer using it. That was always the emphasis.
And so as you've built things out at Intuit, can you talk a little bit about the different elements of your program? Is there a centralized group informing across the global organization? Are there vertical support for accessibility? Maybe talk a little bit about that.
It started as a small group. Lori Samuels actually started. You mentioned you had already interviewed her in a different podcast. And then I came in from Yahoo. It started as very core, like 1 or 2 people. And those 1 or 2 people, we worked extremely hard, but everything we did was archived, published. So we started building this mountain of information. We created an accessibility champion program about 3 years ago. And what that's done is it's allowed us to have a really simple way for everyone to become engaged. It takes anywhere from 10 to 30 minutes to become a champion. We've had over 1,000 people complete the process. That has transformed the way accessibility is discussed at Intuit. So now, because like 5 to 10% of the people at Intuit have champion badges, those conversations are happening every day. And so it's no longer this, this central team. We've got this big cloud of champions. Now, of that big cloud of champions, some of them have stepped forward and say, I want to become the leader of my product. And so they become a level 2 champion, which includes more intensive customer experience and training. And then they become part of a central group. And that central group works together to promote accessibility and solve problems. And then if they want to become a full-time champion, a full-time accessibility leader, then they can become a level 3 champion. And that's when they can really focus on how they can impact the entire company. The champion program is volunteer. I'm not going to someone and saying, you're going to become a champion, you're going to become a level 2. It's more of, let's get everybody to be aware and then allow them to build their careers.
In addition to the champions, how is accessibility brought into the roles for product managers, project managers, researchers, interaction designers, developers? Do people get training or information on their particular role?
That's still something that we're working on. To be honest, we don't have the greatest role declarations yet. We have been looking at the roles that were created by Teach Access. They're really quite good. That helps you define how you're going to do different roles. But it's been the ones that are more full-time accessibility, those have been easier to define. What's been a little bit harder to define is, how do you do the rubrics so that when someone is doing their mid-year or end-of-the-year projects, reviews with their managers, if they've been spending 10% of their time doing passion projects, maybe working on, closed captioning or animations or something like that, how does that get pulled into their end of the year discussion so that they get credit for the work that's not part of the core work? It's like, as a team member, you need to build your product and you need to ship it. And that's what you're mostly being judged upon. But how do you also get judged upon the work you're doing on the side? That's been a little bit harder to incorporate. And I think that that's part of your monthly meetings with managers. Because doing accessibility is about the customer. So you should always be able to talk about your manager and always be able to talk about the work that's being done. But that is a little bit harder to get incorporated.
And you mentioned that customer experience is the number one item that your organization is attentive to. Now looking into the future, are there any initiatives you're able to talk about, or just thoughts that you have about kind of things you'd like to achieve or be able to see happening in digital products and services like 5 years from now?
It's still, there's so much potential for artificial intelligence. I just created a pathway. A pathway is a way that people can go through like a curated course. It's a links, and you kind of keep track. I just created one on artificial intelligence and accessibility. I think where we're going to be seeing a lot of it in the future is where you can use artificial intelligence to simplify the process. For a good example is in TurboTax, there might be 30,000 different tax screens, but we're using artificial intelligence to say, hey, this person is filling out their tax form. They only need to see these 10 screens, or maybe they need to see these 15 screens. So it's like simplifying the process by only showing what's necessary. That affects not just accessibility, but the user experience in general. the more that you can reduce the interactions, I think the more accessible it is. So if it's instead of showing someone 50 radio buttons when really only 5 of them are relevant, then let's only show them the 5 relevant radio buttons. And we know that that's true because of artificial intelligence. We're also looking at how we can incorporate OCR for things like I take a picture of my invoice and it takes all the information out of the invoice and puts it into the QuickBooks. If by taking a picture, I can do it instead of typing in 15 form inputs, that's going to be great. One of the things I like is if you use QuickBooks and you have a phone, just having the phone on you when you drive from your house to a client, it can track and it can create a mileage report. And then that mileage report at the end of the week, you go through this list of mileage and you say, okay, this is business, this is business, and this is business. So in 15 seconds, you're creating your mileage report. That is so much better than keeping a spreadsheet of, here's when I left the house, here's when I got to the client, here's how many miles it took. And I was working with a business owner who was blind, and he was really excited about this because you can be the passenger of a car and you can get those mileage reports. So as he was taking Lyfts and Ubers and going to different clients, he was able to create that mileage report and get deductions that he hadn't had before.
Yeah, those kinds of examples where you have these maybe unanticipated serendipitous pieces for accessibility are always fun to discover and build into our work.
Another thing that we're pushing, I'd like to see more, is that the accessibility team, we've always been, and this is not just at Intuit, but across all companies, we seem to be the team that is most obsessed with customers. Customers who are underrepresented, customers who don't always have a voice. So it's normal for the accessibility team to start expanding into inclusion and diversity and ethics. And so that's where we're also looking at is we've expanded our personas. So our personas are not just Joe is a small business owner who's blind. It's now things like Samantha is a small business owner who's blind, but she's also a single parent of 3 children. And she runs 2 side jobs and she didn't graduate high school. It's like, how can we incorporate more communities into our personas and how we're looking at stuff instead of just it works with a screen reader, so we're good.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up because sometimes I think people in accessibility feel siloed sometimes in what they're doing, and what you just described broadens it significantly in terms of how it fits into our overall engagement with other humans.
I have another example. We implemented a bilingual articles, and there was a switch, and that switch said English or Spanish. Now, that seems like a really easy solution for switching between English and Spanish. But when I turned on the screen reader was essentially saying English or off. And that's because switches is set English on, English off. And that's because switches tend to be on, off. And that goes back to the ethics position. It's like content ethics. Is a non-English truly off? So what they did was they switched from a switch to links, like read this article in English or read this article in Spanish, but it would be, in that language. And that's an example where the accessibility team can also start pulling in some design ethics and saying we shouldn't treat a community as an off or an on.
Mm-hmm. Well, I appreciate all these great examples that you provided of kind of broadening and looking forward. And thank you so much for spending this time to chat with me. I'm sure it will give a lot of people some additional interest in bringing accessibility into their work life or possibly to make it part of our profession.
Thank you so much for asking me and for continuing with your series. So there's a great variety of speakers you've engaged with.
Right. Thanks a lot. Bye bye, Ted.
Bye bye.